Voila, welcome to 148A. Excited to have everyone here today. And we are going to be going through the six wines, starting with Maddie.
So cheers, everybody. And I'm thrilled to hear anybody, a new person comment that, or new to Master the World, that we're chatty and open because it's a safe zone, and it is indeed. So that said, we always put up 3 questions just in case you want your mind to hang on to something as you look, smell, and taste. In this particular case, just a reminder to check for oak, which could be new or neutral. The categories of flowers and herbs are important in semi-aromatic and aromatic white grape varieties, of which this may be one. And finally, texture, which not everybody on is going through a certification process. Some people are simply wanting to experience classic expressions of type. And I find that the mouthfeel is something that's very important, both as a tell, but also, frankly, in determining whether it's going to be appealing in recommending it to what I used to call the common man, capital C, capital M, and I'm now trying to transition to civilians. So there you go, meaning not wine professionals. So that said, we always look at the color. This is, bright. It is more sort of a medium yellow as opposed to straw, but there are definitely some olive green glints in it. And I'm in a combination of overhead light and windows. The wine moves with some viscosity in the glass. We're not going to worry about it too much, but it sheets rather than clings. That could be an indication of moderate alcohol. And I'm going to go ahead and smell and taste in rapid succession, I think. So aromatically, my first approach to this wine, and I tasted it about half an hour ago, it just threw my head back with florality, meaning, flowers, both largely fresh, but probably some dried as well. And it's citrus blossoms, big time. So, if pink grapefruit or Meyer lemon could have a blossom, there you have it. Beautiful florality, followed by a defined, ripe stone fruit, whether you want to define it as peach or nectarine or apricot, there it is. Both of those have sweetness, which could be actual or an illusion. We'll see from ripeness. And then followed by actually tropical character, sort of like a very sweet, ripe melon. I've been eating a lot of honeydews recently, so maybe I've got those on the brain, and a little pineapple as well. But I'm going to go ahead and taste it. It smells young. It smells highly aromatic. It smells very inviting. And I'm curious to see if the sweetness is an illusion or actual perceptible RS on the palate. The attack, that's one of my favorite words, which sounds polemic like a war, but it isn't. It's just that first shocking approach mirrors the aromatics. There's the florality, but immediately there is medium plus, verging on high acidity on this wine. Moderate perception of alcohol. It's not commanding my attention, but I don't have to fight to look for minerality in this wine. There is a strong perception of salinity, because the first approach to a wine tasting is always the most I was going to say graphic, but it really hits you. It's that the acidity is really compelling in this wine. So I'm going to take another taste immediately to see if
Oop,
Maddie, we lost you for a
you
second.
lost your voice.
Oh.
Now you're back.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
No worries.
It says my connection is unstable, for which I apologize, but there you have it.
Nothing unstable about you, Miss Triffon.
Merci. Well, a little bit, because I'm Greek. So mouth-watering acidity, a strong florality. On the palate too, you have that sweet but illusory sweetness, no actual RS, citrus of Meyer lemon, pink grapefruit, ripe peaches, ripe apricots, a little pineapple and melon, amazing flowers throughout, all fresh. I'm chewing on them. And the wine swells, and there's some sweet spices to this too, probably ginger, sesame candy. If you've ever eaten that stuff, I love them. And throughout it all is a strong salinity, like this wine has a little sea salt in it or a little seawater in it. No oak aging to my perception. It is incredibly long and the finish is swelling. There is some perception of lees contact to this wine, though it's not dominant. And, a hint of nuttiness, which just means that it's evolving. I mean, I wouldn't call it oxidative. So I would call it semi to highly aromatic white wine that's young, with mouthwatering acidity, beautiful florality, and sweet citrus. I hope you're finding it as delicious as I am. And I think knowing what it is, it's a damn good example of type. Shall we move to the poll? I'm so proud that I'm nudging you. And please know when you're
Very
voting,
much so.
yeah, that this is a completely safe zone. You're voting anonymously. You're helping yourself and each other. If you don't mind being brutally honest, if you don't think it's Sauvignon Blanc, Albarino, aka Albarino or Chenin, say other, and then tell us in the chat when you feel like it, what you think it is. So those are 3 white grape varieties that I would say. Sauvignon Blanc, if it's not highly aromatic, it really bums me out because it's got a real signature fragrance to it. Albarino, and Chenin can be semi or highly, depending on who makes it and how young it is. But we are not dealing with neutral grape varieties here. These wines have, this wine has a singular fragrance. That strong salinity would bring me to Europe. It isn't necessarily foolproof, but, Albarino is going to float around Spain and Portugal. Chenin is going to be France, and so's Sauvignon Blanc, and France and California, and New Zealand for Sauvignon Blanc, and Chenin, California and France. So take your pick. And of course the other.
Yeah, other's really informative. So if you didn't end up where everybody else did, it's okay. Just tell us where you're thinking, because it will be a great teaching moment for everyone. And I just want to say thank you to Kevin and Elizabeth who are playing with me on the phone. I'm not getting distracted texting other people. I'm actually doing the leaderboard and the full workout. One note is, I know that you're thinking, if I already know what the wine is, or if you kind of guess what the wine is, what's the point of filling out all these things? And it's actually refining your palate. Evan, Maddie, and Tim have spent a lot of time picking out what the flavors are. And I actually really enjoy comparing my flavor notes of what I see with what you guys have seen. So,
and also, frankly, I think it doesn't hurt for the focus. It's like, why bother taking notes?
Yeah.
Even if you have total recall, seriously, which I don't, I like the action of deciding. And, it takes you out of sort of the cocktail party fuzzy atmosphere. So we have, it's not a one-note wonder here. Albarino is pulling ahead at 63%, but Sauvignon Blanc and Chenin have very respectable showings. Poor little others get nothing. And we've got Spain, France, and New Zealand for those 2 grape varieties. So actually the whole issue of old world, new world, which, you can use or not, it's in my subconscious. But when I say old world, I pretty much mean Europe. And the new world is pretty much everything else, even though some of it has been around for a very long time. I'm dying to know what other growing region is being claimed for one of those 3 grape varieties. Oh, South Africa. Somebody put it in there. That's right. And first of all, bravo that you've been exposed to South African Chenin, because it's really, I think, mind-bending. at its best. And I love the honeysuckle and chamomile. Cool.
Did you get elderflower too?
I don't know. Oh, elderflower liqueur I've had. So yes, sure. Absolutely. It's this combination of florals that there isn't one dominant thing. It isn't like roses or jasmine, it's a combination of a bouquet of fresh roses. I fresh flowers. I had non-aromatic carnations behind me, but maybe that's inspiring me as well.
And Maddie,
this wine is just finishing. It's just finishing.
Right. I'm going to go into the next page, but if you could consider Anne's question here, would you consider Gruner for this taste profile?
Actually, that is a killer question. And Elizabeth is saying it would have needed stronger pepper flavors. And I agree with that. I mean, I think that if I were to consider Chenin and Albarino in the same, bucket because of florality, Gruner to me has more pronounced savory and herbal notes. It doesn't mean that this wine doesn't show any savory or any herbal. I just didn't talk about it. Frankly, there's a little lemongrass in there, and somebody said chamomile as well. But we are in Rias Baixas. We are Albarino. We are very young, 2022. And this is actually Val dos Salnes. And forgive me, I am Greek American, and my Spanish pronunciation is not terrific. The producer is a young producer, Val de Megas, which I have to tell you was named that because Rebecca, by the way, you can see here from the map, the Val dos Salnes of all the subdistricts of Rias Baixas is the one that's right up against the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. So it has massive maritime influence. It's, within circles that have deep experiences with this kind of wine, consider it the sort of the birthplace of Albarino, and producing often the most purest expressions. So we would accept 21 with this. Probably because of the, it's open. It's showing everything it's got. And the color is not born yesterday. It's a little bit more yellow, which might have been born from a winemaking process. And I don't mean oak. But this particular producer named this Migas because it means in Spanish a sorceress, which in common folklore figure in Galicia and neighboring Asturias is a prevalent idea. But also I'll remind us that if you look up the word mage, it also means charmer or enchanter. And I like that a lot. So Rebecca, who is young, started this project on the heels of her family's estate, which hasn't been around for that long, like 1980s. But I think it's a beautiful expression of Albarino. She very intentionally goes for natural yeast. She avoids too much, if any, skin contact or extended lees aging because she wants to produce a pure, light, mineral style of oceanic refreshment, she says, which I think she has succeeded because of that strong salinity. This is a damp maritime climate, so we have pergolas, which historically in this area, both for white and red grape production, make it easier to control, mold. Because, when you have warmth combined with wet, guess what you get? And by the way, there is a wonderful article that is, there she is. Rebecca Barral, we'll call her the Enchantress, who is continuing to use the pergola technique instead of bush vines for her Albarino. If you check out the Wine Advocate, the first article that will come up that was just published is by Luis Gutierrez, talking about the present state of Galicia in general, and how, just like other areas, they're dealing with extremes. And also, I hear this a lot, the lack of dependable climate swings. Somebody asked a question, where does the salinity come from? I think you can hypothesize about this. The proximity to the ocean is an easy thought, but it isn't like she's putting salt water in the wine. But also, I think Albarino, much like other grape varieties like Chenin, frankly, especially from the Loire, and to a degree South Africa, and Riesling from anywhere, carries a little pocket of rocks around with it. So in terms of tell for Albarino, and I think this is a good example, we have a wine that's got some muscle to it. The alcohol's not 10.5, 11%. No wood, though occasionally some producers will flirt with wood aging with Albarino. I don't advocate it, but I'm not making it. A strong whetstone minerality that comes from actually granitic soils, medium plus alcohol. I'm reading actually from Tim Gazer's wonderful book, which if you haven't gotten it, run. It's a wonderful book on tasting. He says that one of his colleagues described Albarino as often having a Viognier nose with a Riesling palate. And I can see why they would say that with this wine, because of that beautiful managed florality. It's not obnoxious, but it's, distinct. You don't have to fight for it. Evan, anything you want to add to this?
Very, very minimal. What I do think is interesting, and it's interesting to see the trellising here is there's a lot of people who are just sort of challenging their conventional wisdom on canopy management these days, because there is, either, it's feast or famine. You're either getting rained out all the time, or there's way too much sun and there's drought and everything. So very traditional techniques, and pergolas are, of course, a very traditional technique that you see here. You see it in northern Italy. You see it in places where they wanted to open up canopies because of historical coolness and wetness there. May not be the case anymore, which is why you do have some people going over to vertical shoot positioning and bush vines and all these things to better protect the fruit, because obviously that could be challenging. The other thing that's important to note about pergolas, just as a quick aside, is that the ground that's underneath, in this particular case, in the last photo, it demonstrated that they were just using it for crop cover, but all that. But a lot of places of the world, because land was grow stuff too, because your typical land holding in the Rias Baixas is pretty small, and most people actually pick up 2 or 3 lug buckets of fruit and drive down to the local co-op and sell it. So they're growing grapes on top and they're growing food underneath. So it's actually a very practical system for grape usage, rather than sort of a vineyard, which is, you're really doing nothing in between the rows in terms of anything else, because you just simply don't have that much open ground.
To your point, Luis Gutierrez mentions that, you go there and they're all what he calls mini fudios, small holdings. So even if he hits one that's glorious, he can't really promote it because there isn't enough of it if they're making under 1,000 case production. But I think this is great Thanksgiving wine. I'm not getting a dime for them, but this illusion of sweetness, the florality, I think you can give it to a self-proclaimed sophisticate or a newbie and they will find it delish.
Yeah, so we have to move on, but there is the second part of Deepu's question that needs to be answered. The little bit of creaminess is MLF, malolactic fermentation. Is that common for Albarino?
I've never heard anybody talk about it. Have you, Evan? I mean, I know the leaf contact, sometimes it can be extensive, and sometimes there can be some oak aging that is, neutral, but, affecting the mouthfeel. But I've never certainly smelled a buttery character from it. I would say probably not, but I don't know for certain. Do you know?
Yeah. No, the only thing I would say is, in doing some studying right now in Monsanto and Milgaço, which is a region of Portugal known specifically for Alvarinho rather than Albarino, but the same grapes coming primarily off of granitic soils. There's a lot more play these days with seriously extended lees contact. I was looking at one wine that I'm going to be evaluating that claims 20 months on the lees and all that, and the short end. Yeah, the short end is usually a couple, and they're usually somewhere between 3 and 6. But usually that's where you're going to pick up most of the texture. That and perhaps cement, not so much stainless steel, but cement can give you texture as well too.
We always spend a little bit too much time on wine number 1.
Yeah, I know. All right, we'll keep moving. I'll pick it up.
Yeah.
All right, wine number 2. And again, remember, we always have happy half hour at the end. So if you didn't get your question answered, bring it back up, because we'll be there and we will be happy to do that. Couple of thoughts here. Just a point that is important. I think it's worth reiterating that when we're tasting these wines now, today, November 17th, is not necessarily when this wine was tasted, gridded, etc. So wines show differently on different days. We show differently on different days. So if your flavor descriptors or whatever are not matching head to head what may be shown on our grid, do not freak out. To Madeline's point, oftentimes one person's this is another person's that, and as long as you're not going, I'm finding blackberries and dark cherries, we're pretty cool. We can talk about the other things there, but I do find people getting hung up on, do I have the perfect lexicon of 30 words, in this case for Albarino or whatever the other varietal may be. And I would just say, don't overthink it. Our goal here is not necessarily about nailing wines, but showing you good examples that express themselves well so you can move forward. But don't overthink it. And do be aware that even in the I'll get off of this very quickly, but the algorithm of the gridding, the points for the actual flavors are not necessarily weighed to the point where, like, if you said lime and we said lemon, that you get beat up so hard that you don't pass on a wine. Okay, don't worry about that. It's really going to be about structure, the broad strokes, the categories, et cetera, et cetera. So
I think she
off the
wants you to look
soapbox.
at wine number 2, right?
Yeah, I know. All right, let's talk about wine number 2. So if you look at this wine, it doesn't have quite as much intensity to it. The other thing I was just going to add on color is light is really important. We spend a lot of time in exams making sure you have quote unquote perfect light. So if you don't have absolutely perfect room light or you're dealing with incandescent light, your color may show slightly differently. But again, don't freak too hard unless it's really extreme. But this one's probably in that kind of medium straw vein. Again, a strong amount of green edge to it, which suggests to me youth or cool climate or combo of both. When I look at it here, my wine, as I'm looking at the action of the tears, is sheeting rather than forming big gloppy tears, which would again suggest cooler climate, lower sugar, lower alcohol. All right. I haven't gotten to the mouth yet, Dan, but we'll join you in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and smell it. Always do what I do, which is look for a few things. FBW standing for fruit, earth, and wood. And as I look at my questions here, asking myself, is it fruit forward or earth forward? There's definitely more strong fruit, and I put fruit sort of like organic, growing things out of the ground, herbs, fruit, flowers, all that stuff kind of in that category, as opposed to an earthy, mineral, rocky, composty sort of thing. Does it smell green? Which could be a combination of fruit and herbs, or is it more stone fruit or whatever? And then ultimately, how would we discuss the texture of the wine? As Madeline said before, something very, very important. So what I'm getting right off the bat is a sort of very pungent, zippy, zesty character to it. The fruit here is absolutely driven by sort of a citric note as far as the fruit goes. Grapefruit, sort of a lemony character. It's quincy, it's green appley, it's sort of that kind of fruit like a quince. By the way, if you bit a quince, your teeth would all fall out unless it was cooked down. And by the same token, really hard green apples can do that to you as well. There is a tropical element here that ranges somewhere between passion fruit, maybe. There's a goosey berry character for those people who are familiar with that, which I found out when I was in Canada are ground cherries. Ground cherries and gooseberries are the same thing. Who knew? But I found that out when I was up there just a month or so ago. There's a little bit of a grapefruitiness, and then there's sort of this element of sorrel, of sort of a green herb thing, maybe a peppery character, a grassy character, and then a little bit of, dare I say, cat box, a cattiness to it, that sort of sweet smell. For those of you who have animals at home, particularly cats, that the cat box can get right after you walk by the cat box, right after your cat walked by the cat box. Number one, not number two. And you get that sort of sweet character that's there. There's a salivation going on. I'm literally salivating, and I haven't even tasted the wine yet, which is sort of that shrill sense of I'm anticipating higher acid. Not getting these, maybe the kiss of minerality, but it's not really an earth-driven wine. It really is about all this sort of freshness and fruit character, and again, very much on the pungent side. In the mouth, it is bright. It has got a very sharp, fresh attack. There is the most modest sense of soft prickle on my tongue. I saw that comment buzzed by earlier today, and I'm getting that, which suggests either intentional addition of CO2, which is done in certain styles of wine, or simply a freshness of the wine. Usually they hit it with a little bit of gas before they bottle it, so keep it fresh. It is zesty, it is bright. I would say that the acid is probably medium plus. I would say that the alcohol is medium plus, and it's bright. It's sort of somewhere between lean and round in structure, and the length is medium plus. I can still taste it on my 3+4 second delay. Very good example, but a very singular voice. So I'm not expecting it to be a blended wine. And it does speak very strongly, I believe, of what it is. Granted, I know it is. So what do we got for choices here? We've got Garganega, God bless you, which is the grape, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, that Soave is made from if you were in Northern Italy. We have Sauvignon Blanc as a blend. And by the way, just a reminder, anytime you see the word blend here, it means that it could be driven by the grape variety it is, but blended with a few familial grapes there. So in the case of Sauvignon Blanc, that would most logically be Semillon, maybe Muscadel de Bordelais, etc. Verdejo, which could be pure, but actually blended too, but usually more pure. And then, of course, the associated countries. Garganega going to be specifically with Italy, although they do Sauvignon as well too. Verdejo is Spain, although they do Sauvignon as well, certainly in Catalonia. New Zealand does Sauvignon for sure. California does a little bit of all of the above, although I haven't seen Garganega here, so I correct myself there. And then, of course, we have our others for those of you who want to jump in and suggest something else that was not put forward by us when we were doing this. All right.
Great. We don't have a lot of questions yet, but we have some comments about the spritziness.
Yeah.
Evan, did you get some of that spritziness?
Yeah, no, I said so. I said so already as you were hitting your scores in, probably because you're playing on the leaderboard. Yeah, I mentioned that there was a very soft prickle to this wine, but it was, again, it was not overt. You know, there are some wines where you add definite added CO2 and the wine is almost effervescent. This is just tickly, and it's even not that tickly.
And do you get the tropical element of lychee?
Yeah, I wouldn't go as strong as lychee. I said it was more passion fruit, but there's definitely a tropicality to it, for sure.
Great. All right. I think that on white wines, folks feel more empowered and ready to answer, because on the last one, we had like 96% participation, and now we're close to 84%.
That's a first.
There we go. There we go. So
awesome. I'm going to end the poll.
And let's see what we got here. Yeah, well, this one is what we would say to be kind of a no-brainer or a banker. And I think that if you really did go down, Verdejo, by the way, when it is made in Rueda in Spain, it is oftentimes blended with just a couple of percentage points of Sauvignon Blanc, and you can get a character which is very reminiscent of what you've got here. So I would not sit there and frown too much if you did that. Verdejo is slightly green. It does have a citriness to it, and it can have some green elements from a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc. But this does very much scream of Sauvignon. Italian Sauvignon, for those of you who were there, tend to be a little bit leaner than this one does. This one's got a little bit more richness, and Sauvignons that come from up in the Northeast tend to have a little bit more of a stoniness to them. So this would be somewhere between California and New Zealand, probably is a good call, but it's definitely more New World in personality based on the 87% that I see there than it would be Old World, and you would be correct, as you will see momentarily.
There's a comment here that Scott said that he didn't get the grassiness or herbaceousness to the New Zealand level. Do you feel like you got that, or?
I definitely got green to it for sure. You know, and one person's grass might be another person's pepper, might be another person's sorrel thing. If you're expecting to be rolling around in lawn clippings, no, you're not getting that there as you do with some. Remembering that New Zealand itself is broken down into varying subregions, and the coolest areas like the Awatiri Valley tend to be more in that grassy vein. Those that tend to be more in the the Fairhall or Rapara or other areas could be a little bit more citric in nature. So it really depends on where you are and where the fruit's coming from and the level of ripeness in a given year.
Got it. Okay. As we're going to reveal what this wine is, I wanted to also bring up one point that there was a question if there was some 3 to 4 grams of RS in this wine. Did you feel that there could have been RS at all?
if there is RS there, it's at that very threshold level. But if you remember, sugar lingers in the palate, ripe fruit comes in and goes away. And I'm not getting any, for lack of better words, a sucrose or even a fructose level of sweetness staying in my mouth. Certainly a ripe wine, and that ripeness is coming from the fruit, I think, more so than it would be from sugar. So we are leaving Galicia, we are leaving Spain and the land of Albarino, and we are heading over to another part of the world, a long ways away. So I hope you took some sleeping
I just
help when
took
you
the
were
words
going
out of
on
my
the
mouth,
flight.
right?
That's probably not a direct flight, I might add, as
Mm-hmm.
we end up in New Zealand, and we end up in Marlborough, and we end up on the northern part of the South Island there in the Marlborough district. And this, of course, is in fact ground zero for Sauvignon Blanc. In this part of the world, Sauvignon Blanc is grown on the North Island. It is grown in many parts of New Zealand, but Marlborough is both voluminously the most important, and really where it was first planted in the 70s by the folks at then Montana, now Pernod Ricard, New Zealand, and the great Peter Hubscher, who were the folks who sort of said, maybe this grape will do well here. I can't do a Kiwi accent, so I'm not going to do it there and do it well. But this is coming from a selection of vineyards in the sort of classic areas of what they call the Southern Valleys, as opposed to Awateri, which is further towards the coast and further south, or even some of the more new areas like Waihopai and things like that tend to be a little bit more borderline. And because they don't ripen every year, to the point that was said earlier, they tend to be the greenest in all of those. But oftentimes they will blend that out because it can be a bit too green and strong there. So as far as the producer, who are we dealing with here? Well, we're dealing with a newer project, but an older name. So Ponga is a project that was started by the children of Alan Scott. Alan Scott Wines. Alan was one of the first people in this part of the world to be doing Sauvignon Blanc, and is sort of generationally important and really a person that helped establish the category there. His children, Josh, Sarah, and Victoria, have carried that on a step further, not only sort of taking over for dad as dad gets over for the namesake label, but starting off this project as well. Ponga is named for a fern. Actually, it comes from the word kapanga, which is the Maori word for this specific fern, which you can see, you'll see pictures of it later in photographs, but here just on the label that sort of speaks to strength and goodness in Maori, which is of course the native people of that land. And it speaks very much to classic New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, that sort of fresh, bright, citrusy, grapefruity, passion fruity comboed, a little bit of green, a little bit of that in these sort of so-called warmer areas. So this is a classic shot of a vineyard. They actually source from several vineyards within the area, but that's a vineyard that they're working from there. And for those people, as we look at the Ponga fern on the next photo, for those people that are playing and you're going to be revealing your wine, one thing you might note on that, there's your Ponga ferns, that you might note on the actual label on the back is that prior to saying Ponga, it actually references the winery where this wine was bottled, which is the Wakefield Downs vineyard project. And that is actually owned by Babbage Vineyards, Babbage being another time-honored winery there. And simply because Alan Scott is sort of maxed out at its production, the kids couldn't do their wine at mom and dad's place. So they rented out some tank space around the corner, and therefore they're doing it there. So don't let that fool you. It is Ponga fruit. It is made by the Alan Scott kids, and it is a lovely example of the wine.
Evan, we have a few questions.
I was going to answer the question about the cat pee. Is that where you're going?
Right. Go for it, and then there are a few more. So I want to quickly move through this question.
By the way, I'm going to encourage everyone who thinks this is too obvious to memorize it, because especially if you're going through a varietal recognition challenge, this is such a strong example of Sauvignon Blanc, combining the pyrrhizine, right? Which is, more vegetal green. The cat pee, which here's a beautiful scientific explanation of it, derived from thiols, organic compounds containing sulfur. Yeah. And both pyrrhizine and I think cat pee will be affected in a strong presence or a less presence, depending on how ripe the wine is. But
I
that
think you were just channeling Tim right there, Maddie.
no, right. I feel it's important to, keep up Tim's voice and all
yeah,
of
and it's
this.
actually in the same family teals, if you will, sort of vends with mercaptans a little bit, which is again sulfuric in nature, but it is specifically associated with Sauvignon Blanc, that specific teal.
I just want to make sure that the folks, because there are 20% of people did pick California. So we're not saying that, oh my gosh, you should have gotten New Zealand. We have some questions specifically about this. So I just want to bring them up, Evan, because I think that for those who picked California, this is going to be helpful. Mark asks, are there specific markers for Marlborough? Sometimes it seems like I often get the big grapefruit and some tropical notes. And then the second part of a similar sort of Marlborough versus California question is, does California show higher levels of alcohol?
Okay, it's a lot of things really quickly because I know we're always time challenged here.
Sure.
Citric character is a character that you find in Sauvignon Blanc in general. In riper areas, think about if you do even want to show it parallel to California, when you have warmer climates, that's when you're going to get the pink grapefruit and the white grapefruit characters. That's going to be true in New Zealand as well. If you're picking a little bit riper, which this wine is admittedly picking a little bit riper, you're going to show that. The tropicality is something that is distinctively New Zealand and not California. You are not going to find strong notes of tropicality here. If anything, you're going to find more tree fruit associated with your riper citrus fruit. So if you are getting elements of passion fruit, if you are getting an element of guava, if you're getting star fruit, if you're getting anything with that, that is much more of a New Zealand character than it would be there. You're not always going to get that sort of brash green bell peppery character, which is really just a sign of very cool climate. And in a world of increasingly challenged climate, this is a character that is very much in flux, the way Chablis' steeliness is very much in flux, as the way the olivey, grassy character of Sancerre is very much in flux. So continue to be open-minded with your thinking, but if you do find a citrus character in concert with a tropical character, that's usually a fairly good sign that you could very well be in New Zealand. Yes.
And Evan, when you said that the bell pepper is not as strong, that's what Kevin is referring to as pyrazines, right?
Yeah,
So
anytime you find something that's sort of very green, and usually in the bell pepper or jalapeno or some form of the pepper vein, correct?
Yeah, and then one last part is Anne's asking, was the high acid what took you away from considering Elgin, and or Casablanca?
Oh, okay. Well, it depends. Casablanca is a good place, and if it were coastal Casablanca, no, high acid is part of it. As you move interior towards the Andes Mountain, it tends to get more like this, which is in terms of that grapefruity vein. Elgin, I haven't had a good sizable sampling enough of Elgin Sauvignon Blanc to comment on that, so I would be defer to the
those
folks
of
in
you
South
lucky
Africa.
enough to go to South Africa
Yeah,
with
there you
any
go. There you
regularity,
go.
right?
Okay.
You know what?
Right.
Parting shot on this wine.
Yeah.
There is, a distinct character of rockiness to this wine in organic earth that I think gives it complexity and pulls it away from being a one-note wonder. Neat wine.
Yeah, there's a soft note of minerality, which I actually believe is in the grid for those people that are gridding. I didn't find it strongly today, but no, it's certainly not absent of something there. Absolutely.
Okie dokie. So I'm on, right?
You are
You're
on.
on.
3. Okay, this is where I find color endlessly interesting, and I'm always telling people, especially if you're blind tasting and you get to the initial conclusion and you're going, damn if I know, go back to the color and the structure, and it will often set you free, or at least, reset you a little bit. So when we look at this, the center is a deep ruby red, but it's not exactly opaque, but I can't read through it. So it is speaking to me of a grape variety that's probably not tiny and super thick-skinned, but somewhere in between. And also color extraction can have something to do with a specific vintage as well. If your eye follows the true ruby red to the very rim, and I'm always looking at it on an angle against a white surface, right? So I can see from the center all the way to the rim, there really is not much hue variation until you get to the rim, in which case it's just a lighter ruby red. Is there any yellow in it? If it's starting, It's just starting. Is there a little glass stain? Just a skosh. Is that a Midwest thing, skosh, Evan, or a titch?
I think so. I usually use the French term soupçon because I
There we
spent my
go.
formative years in
Well,
Europe.
Metro Detroiter,
There you
which
go.
includes Chicago, right? So it appears to be a relatively young red, possibly made from a moderate to thinner skin grape variety. And it is leaving a little bit of stain. Aromatically, whoa, it's lush. The first thing I get is this wave of perfectly ripe red fruit, like red plums, red cherries, the Michigander again. And then right on the heels of it, some black fruit, a little bit of black cherries as well. But it smells ripe and tart. And I'm curious to see if that'll come through on the palate as well. It has, again, there's the florality. And I think I actually checked with Tim if that was a legit word, and he said it is. But in this case, the flowers, and we often forget about it in red wine, but there is, I would say fresh and even dried jasmine, something like that, hibiscus. And I don't want to get too precious about it, but these are aromatic flowers. There's a little bit of an earth element, but actually, you know what I'm smelling? I don't know about all y'all, but I don't grow much, but I grow basil because kind of like succulents, it's hard to kill. And I've been known to kill succulents, but I love sweet basil, particularly opal basil. And this is what that smells like to me. I think there's some organic earth in this smell, like I was digging around in the garden or just trying to clean out the beds. And is there oak? Probably, it's I have to really put my mind to it, but I would bet significant amounts of money it's not new. But an intense fruitiness that's lush and ripe, and a combination of red fruit and a little bit of black and or blue fruit. I'm going to go ahead and taste it. There are the purple flowers, maybe some violets too, and tart red fruit on the palate, pomegranate, barely ripe red and black cherries. I mean, really mouthwatering, really delicious. Sweet herbs, maybe some spices like red and black licorice, a little bit of earthiness, like a truffle mushroom thing, but lift. It's surprising me because I didn't expect it. The acidity is moderate plus, though the tannins are, if you rub your tongue against the roof of your mouth, they're not absent, and I can especially feel them on the front, which I've been told is fruit tannin, right? And I spent my career not worrying about whether it was fruit or barrel tannin. But the tannins are present, but they're very soft. This is positively gulpable in terms of the flavor. There is a little bit of very attractive bitterness to it. That's slightly stemmy, and not in a negative way. You know how, I would bet significant amounts of money. I seem to be on a Las Vegas thing today that it ain't Zinfandel, but it's got a little bit of that stemmy, bushy character to it that I like a lot. It gives the wine cinch, especially on the heels of such soft tannin. I'm going to take one more sip. Mid palate, which I love to do, just hold it for a second before you assess the finish. There is sweetness to the fruit, which speaks of perfectly ripe. It speaks of maybe a year that was a little bit warmer, because the alcohol is medium plus, though it's not commanding my attention, but really delicious red fruit dominating with a little bit of black. And the finish is long, but I think this wine has a life ahead of it. It's coming off young, and I wouldn't mind a little more time to develop even more complexity. Here we go. Are we putting the poll up there? Are there some questions I should pay attention to savory. That's the word I'm looking for. There's a savory quality to this wine that I really like. Some iron, some mint, some, I'm reading your comments, some beef jerky, which as a career vegetarian, I have not experienced, but maybe I'll make it a mission. I take a bite of everything else, you know.
Well,
Wine.
I think that the mint comment and your basil comment probably align a little bit. There's sort of a sweetness to the herbal character.
The herbal
But I think,
character.
but I do think your point. I mean, this wine is really about shrill red fruit for sure, sort of biting acid and a softness to they present, but a softness to really well managed tannin.
And you know, this is very interesting because you could really wrestle with this Gamay versus Pinot versus Barbera. And if this is Gamay, it is a really noble expression of it, because if there's carbonic in this, it's definitely a small percentage of it. I would say it's probably more a whole cluster and partial whole cluster, and that little bitterness can come from that as well. Pinot Noir, and I really wrestled with this thinking about it, looking at this earlier, Limang. I think Pinot, at the risk of sounding slightly snobby, will generally show almost exclusively red fruit, you know, depending on the wine and depending on where it's grown. But also there's a complexity to the smell of Pinot specifically that, you know, usually I get more of a clove, cinnamon, allspice character to it. But, you know, this is, I'm not dogging the nobility of this wine. And Barbera, very interesting choice because it historically has soft tannin and high acidity. However, the one thing I will say about Barbera, and where I rarely will like try to guess it, is because the styles of Barbera, especially in the Piedmont, you know, its homeland, varies so much. Some people put oak on it, some don't. Sometimes it's more concentrated and serious. Sometimes it's quite fluffy. But, you know, I think you get to really wrestle with this and decide also, are you in the New World or are you in Europe? So Italy, Barbera, France, Pinot, or Gamay, Oregon, Pinot for sure, New Zealand, Pinot for sure. I'm
Gamay in Oregon.
What you think? What's that?
Gamay in Oregon too.
Gamay in Oregon too.
I'm going to close the poll. I think that it's safe to say that as we look at the results, people are looking at more Europe. It's almost a 90%. Yeah.
I'm going to
90% of that. And then the Barbera. So I do think that you'll need to address that even more than you already have. As you were talking, I could see the Pinot numbers go down and the Barbera numbers go up.
You know, the only thing I would say about Barbera, maybe Madeline, you can jump in here too, is that it doesn't have the pigmentation. You know, Barberas are really almost have more volume of color than this one.
And purple, you know, and that's the thing. That's why I mentioned Pinot too, and why I mentioned this business, that sometimes the color can set you free, you know, if you're really wrestling. But you basically have three varieties. This wine could be any of these three. If it is Gamay, it's certainly not, you know, a fluffoid Beaujolais. You know, it would probably be Cru. If it's a Barbera, it's a serious one, but I don't think there's any new oak on it, possibly some used oak. And if it's Pinot, it's in its sort of embryonic stage where it has yet to develop layers. But I'm curious. Well, we are in Europe. We are in Fleury specifically, which I find very interesting. And what is really, you know, I rarely talk about vintages. This is, and Fleury, by the way, is the northern half of the communes of Beaujolais, above Beaujolais Village. It's known for, you know, elegant, aromatic, high-toned, pretty wines. However, this is from the 2020 vintage. Oh, Akeem's leaving us. Thank you for being expressive while you were here. So hopefully you'll listen to us later on a recording. We appreciate your contribution. This is from the 2020 vintage, which I got to tell you is not your basic, you know, Burgundy, and I mean Cum Burgundy vintage. You get a lot of dark coloration in both Pinot and in Cru Beaujolais. This is very interesting. It is a monopole property, Chateau Vivier. You don't see that word very often anywhere in Burgundy, you know, Greater Burgundy. This is a wonderfully intrepid producer called House of the Messenger, Maison L'Envoyé, who are on a global trek to find and produce from excellent vineyards, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Gamay. And this wine, and I'm going to address the winemaking technique on this immediately, Evan, because I think it's very specific and very instructive. And I'm reading, I initially guessed Gamay, but I didn't get the carbonic or bubblegum. Cha-ching, Cru Beaujolais often is using, specifically and intentionally using classic Burgundian winemaking techniques. However, that can include, and this wine is 50-50 whole cluster versus destemmed. And I think that's so instructive because the whole cluster can involve a little bit of carbonic, right, by nature, but it's not overt. And just to clarify this, because I've looked it up 10 times, if I've looked it up once over the last 5 years, whole cluster punches up the tannin, which in this case, I don't think we really feel it. Oh, wow, what a gorgeous look. And that soil, by the way, not evident here, but this particular property is pink granite. At some altitude. So punches up tannin, punches up aroma, punches up complexity and freshness. On the downside, it can leach color, which I don't think it did here because of the vintage. And it can bring a little bit of toughness or greenness. In this particular case, because I think this vintage is so ripe, that little bit of stemminess is a plus. I really, really like this wine. And I think that it's wonderful, giving us a clear description, both intellectually and experientially, in the whole subject of carbonic / whole cluster versus destemming.
So, Maddie, whole cluster gives that tannin because of the stems and everything, meaning that they're in there, right? I just want to clarify that for folks out there.
And if you hold it, you can get it mid-palate. And if you hold it on your palate, this is tremendous freshness, even in a year this ripe as 2020. The acidity is beautifully refreshing. That gives the wine, I think, something to look forward to. It's going to evolve, but you get that really pleasant bitterness that isn't just tannin, because the tannins are very smooth, but it's specific stemminess that I referred to. And I love the combo of red and a little bit of black and blue fruit in this wine.
Yeah. I love this next comment. Sorry, this next comment from Elizabeth is a really interesting one. Do you feel like having the acid, is it too high to be Gamay? This person, Elizabeth, said, I thought, it might be Gamay, but the acid was too high to be Gamay, and I didn't get the black tea notes I usually get from Pinot, so I chose Barbera. What do you think?
So you did it by default, which is sort of like, when in doubt, why not Barbera? But I would say, I don't think this firm acidity is unusual in Gamay, in the same way that it's not unusual in Pinot. I mean, this is higher slopes, even in a warmer vintage. You've got an excellent producer. But, the bubble gum and the candied fruit is going to be very specifically intentional carbonic. I don't think the acidity is unnatural. And don't forget, Barbera is known for high acidity and low tannin. So is Pinot. So is Gamay.
Yeah, I would simply add too that it's important as you sort of think about Gamay, and I know we have 3 more wines we got to move. So, but it's important to think of Gamay or Beaujolais as not monolithic. Everything is not Beaujolais Nouveau. Everything is not Beaujolais Village, right? You do, as you move to the north, get these more singular, in this case, very singular site expression of what they're doing, and they're taking their cues increasingly from their partners up north in Burgundy, and less so from the rest of the family down south. So this wine, you could say, arguably, is vinified more like a Pinot Noir.
Technique, right?
Yeah, exactly. Than that. So, and so what they're using here is, we call it whole cluster. By the way, whole cluster and partial carbonic are the same thing if you ever read them. So they're deferring to the fact that in these places, these sort of villages of the north, the cru of the north, if you will, you can make a wine that has a more singular site expression, regional site expression of a Gamay grape than not. So try and start making that delineation in your
And the
brain.
quality level of Cru Beaujolais is so high these days. And we can frankly thank, what is it, the Gang of Four from Kermit Lynch that started this whole, expression of Beaujolais, or specifically Cru Beaujolais, that mirrored Burgundian techniques and made it harder to tell the difference between this and Pinot, but also really elevated the perception of Gamay. I guess we have to move on, but I got to tell you, another great Thanksgiving wine.
Yeah, absolutely. You should get all the Thanksgiving wines today. Okay, let's move on to wine number 4, and I know we have a little time to make up here. So, looking at this wine from a standpoint of color, not as much color as the last wine, so a little bit more. They're very, very translucent. I can read everything on the sheet in front of me there. The color at the edge is getting just a slightly hint of oranging or rusting to it, so it's showing me a little bit of age and development in it, but it shows to be a very sort of light and easygoing wine. Oftentimes, the extraction of color will, in many cases, give you a sense of what the kind of wine you're going to have will be. As I swirl it, I'm not showing any pigmentation in anything that is sheeting or tearing down the glass. And once again, I am getting more of a sheeting action than a tearing action, which suggests to me, again, probably a slightly lower-ish or moderate level of alcohol. Okay. In the nose, again, as I'm looking for my fruit, earth, and wood here, getting an interesting combination of things. It's very complex in terms of just the way it makes your brain think right off the bat. There is certainly a fruitiness to it, and it's probably a combination of sort of red fruits, but red fruits that are not necessarily sweet. So it's not so much raspberries and strawberries. It's more like red currants and red plums and things that are a bit more savory in nature. There's a little bit of sort of again, a kind of plumminess. I'm not getting really any black fruit to it. I am actually, though, getting a little bit of a citrusy character to it, sort of on the sweet side, maybe a bit of orange or a little bit of tangerine, both combination of soft fruit and a little bit of rind as well. There's definitely greener elements to it in the form of sort of both a combination of kind of leafier greens, maybe a little bit of chard arugula-ish, something like that. There's also a fennel-y character to it, slightly anisey element to it. Maybe a little bit of like tomato leaf, and again, just something more savory by definition. It's not what I would call a fruit-forward wine by any stretch of the imagination in the sort of traditional thing. There are some herbal characters to it as well. And then some sort of, to use Madeline's phrase, sort of like a licoricey character before in here as well, sort of picking up on, again, the licorice fennel thing going on there. Maybe a bit of paprika or something slightly smoky. And again, maybe just a little bit of something sort of savory, dare I say meaty, but maybe a little bit more peppery on the back end, and a bit of leather, a bit of rusticity. In the palate, nice moderate attack, not as quite forward as some of these others are. A little bit subtle too. There is definitely acidity to the wine, although I wouldn't say it's raging, certainly coming off of that Gamay, which had a much higher acid expression there. Say that the alcohol on the wine is probably somewhere between medium plus-ish. A little bit of warmth in my palate, but not there. Tannins, very soft. Again, not a strong tannic presence on the wine, but I don't think that's necessarily the personality of the grape to produce so as well. And then it's got deceptive length. So even though it's a lighter style wine, nevertheless, that length carries in a very good way. And it's got a roundness to its texture. It doesn't have quite as much linearity as the wines before. So an interesting wine, bit of a different wine, but it's okay. Remember, one of the things I try and do all the time is expand, show you things. So you might have a harder time with it, but let's talk about it. Grenache or Grenache blend. Again, Grenache being sort of usually a softer wine, red fruited wine, known to drop color, etc. Pais, which is a grape that we also know of here in California, is the Mission grape, but it's known in other parts of the world as, I don't know, Criolla Chica, Negra Peruana, Listran Prieto if you're down in the Canary Islands. Produces a very interesting, unique unique style of wine, tends to be a little bit on the savory side. Sangiovese, which depending on where you are, can make different wines, but in sort of the classic kind of Chianti-ish thing, you will pick up a little bit of that leatheriness. You will pick up on the red fruit there. The acid levels and the tannin levels will vary based on interpretation. And then if you're looking to where you are, Italy would clearly be Sangiovese and Grenache. They do a little bit of Grenache called Cannonau in that part of the world. País is probably going to be either Spain down in the Canaries or Chile and Argentina as well too. Again, it's called Criolla Chica down there. Sangiovese is really Italian, of course, but people forget a little bit of it down in Argentina as well too, and actually a kiss of it, a soupçon of it in Chile as well. And then we, of course, we have our place for.
Evan, I think people were actually kind of 70% in Europe and 30% in Chile. Any comment on why this wine is leading people to Europe?
Well, it has a sort of savory, non-fruit bomb sensibility about it, and usually fruit bombs are associated more with New World things. So if you're thinking that it could be Italian or it could be Spanish, it has that sort of sensibility. It also has that sort of je ne sais quoi. You know, we say, "I want it tastes so Italian, it tastes so Spanish." Because of that rusticity, because of that savoriness, which is not necessarily associated all the time with New World styles of wine. So again, a Grenache or Garnacha, depending on where you are, tends to be a possibility. This wine to me doesn't have perhaps enough fruit to be a Grenache thing. They tend to be a little bit jammier there. The País Sangiovese thing is an interesting discussion. And Chile, Spain, and Italy are interesting choices. So let's see where we go, and then we can talk a little bit more about it. So we are leaving Beaujolais. Ciao, Beaujolais. Saying goodbye to lots of nice people, delicious wines, and surprisingly very good beef. Charolais beef, one of my favorites in France, comes from the Charolais cows that are all across that area. And we're leaving the old world, and we're actually going to the new world. So it's interesting. So whatever wine we end up with is indeed demonstrating this sort of old world sensibility, classic areas of what we're doing. And we're going down to South America. We are going into Chile. We are going into a larger area called the Secano Interior, and we are going to a winery and a movement and a manifesto called the Garage Wine Company, run by some good friends of mine, Derek and Pilar. I started this project in 2001. And in fact, this wine is a País, and it can be a blended wine. País is often blended with Carignan traditionally, but oftentimes is served by itself. Historically, in this part of the world, and the Maule sort of is made up of that sort of Maule, Biobío, Southern Valleys, Itata, the whole area is a Secano together, and it is a País. And we are lucky enough to have Derek on the call. So during the happy half hour, he's going to talk to you a little bit more. Number one, to explain the very unique winemaking process, which I'm not going to steal. I want him to talk about his own process to make this sort of single ferment series, which he will talk to you about in 2021, and making it here. And it can be sort of made in a savory way. It could be made, there's a lot of different interpretations of País these days. Historically, it was made as a wine called pipeño, which is just a very simple, what they would call a drinkable everyday thing. Come in demi-johns, you have it at your house. It wasn't super safe, but it could be very rustic and very mean. And then interestingly, coincidentally, coming off there was a gentleman from Beaujolais who came over, Louis-Antoine Lut, who showed them that they have actually used some partial carbonics and things like that. It could bring some interesting elements out of the wine. So now I want to say one thing, a little bit of a spoiler alert here. For those of you who are playing our game, or for those of you who are fans and do this the day before and want to know, you are going to note a discrepancy between the label that you have and the wine that is represented here on the slide and represented in the bottle. The bottle and the slide correspond. We had a small hiccup on the label, and we have used Derek's País before. We have used Derek's Sasso before. We love Derek and Derek's wines, and there was a little glitch when it came to the printing on this thing. So anyway, most importantly, forget Evan's screw up on that one. Most importantly, know that the wine and the label speak hand in hand to exactly what they are, which is really very much a lovely showing, an example of the place. And I want to just give a quick shout out to Derek because he is too modest to not. But Derek is Canadian. Derek Mossman Knapp, and he has single-handedly led the sort of rebirth, the renaissance of older vineyards, of the Pais grape, of the movement in Carignan with Vigno, in the movement of the small independent winemaker in Movi. And we would say it takes a village. There's Derek on the right. It takes a Canadian to galvanize the small producer industry in Chile and really get them to be proud of their efforts here. It's not just the same 3 or 4 larger producers that are more shown in parts all over the world, but there are a couple of hundred small producers in Chile doing some amazing things. And Derek to the right, and his much better half Pilar to the left are the team behind Garage, which literally in this case actually started in a garage.
I wanted to stay on the label for a while because there was a very cute little icon up top, and that was a cartoon drawing of Pilar. I thought that was really cute that label had that piece. So,
and by the way, they never age. They look exactly the same now as they did.
All right.
I have to say, because I know I'm on with wine number 4, and I know we are challenged for time, but I will tell you, a wine like this is why I'm grateful that Evan insists on putting in discovery wines. Wine, because you gave this to me blind. There I am betting again, significant amount of money. I've never put a bet in my life, so this is, I don't know what's inspiring me here tonight, but this speaks old vine, European sensibility, complexity, depth of flavor, earthiness. Very cool, Evan, with kind of a light touch. So
not testable, not
testable.
Not
you know what? I love Anne's comment here. She said, "Thanks for stretching us." I think that's.
And I love the people that went for the Sangiovese blend, because that's what I would have considered with that mouth-watering acidity balancing the tannin. And the only reason I wasn't pulled to Grenache intellectually is I want to smell more peppered meat.
Pepper.
But anyway, okay.
All right, let's go. 5.
And here we go on considering on our questions, define the fruit, and then don't forget to qualify it as fresh and dried, because that will help in terms of deducting. Oh yeah, we're going to look at this color as like 6 ways to Sunday. Consider the quality of the oak and the complexity. What does complexity mean? Is it a one-note wonder, or there's so many layers you're having a hard time defining them? So visually, this wine is a knockout, and it absolutely defines what gradation is to me. I mean, it's just beautiful. Take a picture of it. Look at the middle is pure ruby red. It is translucent. You might be able to read through it. It's actually quite brilliant, but if your eye travels from the center to the rim, I see 4 to 6 different hues. So this wine is telegraphing barrel and bottle age, and or a specific kind of grape variety, because there are a couple 3 that are maddening, especially to blind tasting candidates, that can give the impression of age even when they're young. Gorgeous. That rim is a true orange or amber, if you will. But I just love the number of hues in this wine. I could just stare at it. And remember the thought, the color will set you free. So aromatically and on the palate. The first time I tasted it about an hour ago, and it's still doing it. I want to lose myself and just punch out of this tasting, just smell this and not worry about defining it. But I'm, getting my bearings here. The first thing that strikes me that's right up front is red fruit, but unlike the Gamay that we tasted, this is, again, qualifying it. Yes, cherries. Yes, sour cherries. Yes, raspberries. Maybe even a little black fruit, but dried or raisinated. Not jammy, not cooked, but there's a dried aspect to this. And on the heels of that, there's a florality. There we are, lots of flowers in our reds today. That is more edging towards potpourri to me. Really beautiful, dried, petals of some sort. And then on the heels of that, there is an earthiness that is, at least up front to me, the third wave is organic earthiness. So it's like truffle, mushroom, dried earth, maybe a little clay smell. not so much inorganic, and something Bordelaise about this, like tobacco leaf, I don't know if that's wood related or not. Other spices. I must have licorice on the brain today because I'm getting black licorice aromatically. So I'm going to bet on licorice. There we go. There's something's going to come out of this. And then there is a little bit of leather. I mean, some people, just twitch if they smell Brettanomyces or VA, but I'm of the camp, I guess a village elder, that a little bit adds complexity. And is there oak on this? Yes, but it's like a non-issue. It's just enough to add something to it, the right amount of salt, correct? And actually, it might be partial new because I get a little bit of what I call the Starbucks smell, chocolate, that type of thing. It is, and somebody likes a little bit of bread. Me too, Tom. I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate and not get lost for the next 10 minutes in the nose. Now, this is where holding it on your palate for a minute is going to be very useful because whammo, it's got tannin, right? It kind of creeps up on you because you didn't expect it from smelling it. And you know what I'm going to do? And this is a personal trick. I'm going to take it back on the palate immediately. I did that with the first wine, the Albarino. Remember when the acid was throwing my head back? The tannin's doing the same thing to me now, and my palate's going, got it. We're doing tannin. So mid palate, if I hold it, there's that actually ripe and dried cherries and a little bit of black as well. There's that actually even more spice on the palate, exotic spice like Indian spices, cardamom. There's that dried earth. There's a little bit of that wood component, but I'd be very curious to know if I didn't know what the composition was. Shrooms, truffles. The florals have moved back a little bit. Alcohol is not low. If I had to put a number on it, and it's not my practice usually, but I'd say it's medium plus to high, but it works with this wine. Remember, alcohol gives mouthfeel as well and weight, and it absolutely works with this wine. It's mouthwatering. The acid is not deficient on this wine, but dried lavender, love it. Is a poet. And I would say, if I had to define the tannins, these are, I can taste the wine through it, so they're not murderous, right? But they are quite gritty, quite astringent, but in a sort of well-mannered way. But even in my little vegetarian, subconscious, I'm thinking, gee, a platter of cured meat would be a good idea for most people, or perhaps an olive or a little bit of olive oil. So what we've got is, not to beat it to death, because Li Meng's going to have a heart attack looking at the time, but a highly complex red wine that is showing, elements of bottle and barrel age, but also showing, and please go ahead and vote with exuberance. We should let people vote more than once, Li Meng. I'm just saying.
As they hear you talk, yeah.
In case they're on the fence, just to mess it up. But I really think that the palate shows youth to this wine, whereas the nose is showing vinosity. Beautiful word, vinous. That means smells that you couldn't have without at least a little bit of bottle age and or barrel age. The length is sufficient, very interesting. And this is why I think this wine is on the young side, because I find that when a red wine of this depth is not quite ready, the finish can be a little bit short. What are our options? Nebbiolo and Sangiovese, and those of you that are going through certifications are always wrestling with those two. When we reveal it, I'm going to express an opinion. I don't think it's that hard to determine between the two. I'm just saying. And Syrah, which can certainly show complexity, but would need to have significant age to show this kind of gradation of color. So I'm not pulling you away from it. Just ask yourself, does it have, the Jimmy Dean smoked meat and a little bit of pepper quality to it? And ripe, not just red, ripe, not so much dried red and black fruit. And then our options, Australia embraces everything because they've planted everything there, but certainly celebrated for Shiraz, as I was told to pronounce it, right, Ev?
Mhm.
And what do we have? Nebbiolo leads, but very interesting. Total neck and neck race between Sangiovese and Syrah. Love it. No others. Italy, 93%. So maybe it's Italian Syrah, which would be grown where? In Bulgaria?
Tuscany
Yeah,
mostly.
No, Nebbiolo is definitely at the very top of
yes.
73%.
So let's reveal, and we're going to put everyone's mind to rest, and you're going to give yourselves a big hug because we are getting on our, aisle seat business class. I'm telling you, if you have to imagine, that's what we're doing. And
It's a
we,
long flight, so you deserve
yes, I think so
it.
too. And I won't have cocktails, but I'll
So it
enjoy
had
it.
a lot of earthy elements that led everybody, you think, down to that European
I
100%.
think so, but I also think, frankly, it's the combination of that just glorious complexity on the nose and frankly, hard tannins that in this particular case are well mannered. And you know how sometimes wines show you what they are? This wine is doing it. So this is indeed Barolo. It is actually, well, going into Nerdville just for a moment, because I think it's important. It took me a while to get this, but this is from a producer that is in the township of Barolo, because Barolo refers to the larger area with provinces that are famous, such as Barolo, La Mora, Castiglione Falletto, Serralunga d'Alba. I'm just practicing my Italian accent, It has some barrel age. It is by law, I think it has to be 18 months in barrel and more if it's a Reserva, but I think just 12 in barrel. And those of you who are studying, who are little walking encyclopedias trying to pass the advanced, you're going to know this exactly the number, but it is a great example of a well-mannered Barolo, in my opinion, that is from, if you look at a map, the La Mora Barolo and township of Barolo, part of the larger area. Those two communes represent a kind of earth that produces smoother tannin wines. And if you look it up, I always get confused on the pronunciation of it, but you know what I'm talking about. I had it here somewhere. The right side of the region that includes the communes of Castiglione, Falletto, Serralunga d'Alba, and Monforte d'Alba actually has a type of soil that has more sandstone as opposed to the calcareous marl on the west, and that produces harder, longer-lived Barolos. And we're really generalizing here. But this is, I guess Barbaresco. You know what? The whole Barolo Barbaresco thing, if you've gotten to Nebbiolo, God love you. That's a good thing, because if that's your biggest problem, then you are doing very well indeed, because some Barbaresco producers can make really
Chunky wines.
yeah, and some Barolo producers can make, very well-mannered, and I can say this, even feminine wines, if you will. But this is a producer that is proud to proclaim that they have the first woman who graduated from the Turin University in enology with high honors. Yay. And this was in the 80s, within spitting distance of today. So bravo. Her name is actually Virna, and she runs this estate with her sister. And they recently, within the last several years, hold that picture for a second, Limang. They changed the packaging and the name because they wanted to celebrate the fact that this was a woman-owned and operated Barolo facility. Those different aspects and those rolling hills, I just get chills looking at it.
Yeah,
it's it's the Langhe, and it's so cool, and you can read about the fog and you can read about the different aspects, but I just believe in my little heart of hearts, part of the complexity of what Nebbiolo does in We have the larger Langhe, and within that, the Cuneo province, and within that we have Barolo and Barbaresco. This is, you know, the epicenter of cosmic class Nebbiolo production. And, you know, I really think that what you can read about this and take it much deeper, because I feel that to a degree I'm not doing, look at the family, and that is Virna to the right, with the shirt on her pockets and a big smile on her face. And her sister is to the far left with the blonde hair. And this is, you know, these are their combined families. But, you know, I don't think I'm doing this wine a dishonor by kind of running through it, because I think in tasting it, it tells you what you need to know. So parting shot, and then you take the ball on 6-7. Nebbiolo and Sangiovese, I think, with rare exception, some exception, the quality of the Nebbiolo is simply meaner. You know, it's got an aggression to it that Sangiovese, even the richest, youngest Brunellos don't have. I think Brunello has a darker color, and Sangiovese in general, though you'll get that gradation. But to me, also a certain complexity that really only Nebbiolo does, compared to almost any other red grape variety I can think of. So complexity of aromatics, the color with the translucency, but the quality of the tannin. That's it.
And Maddie, Barbaresco, Kevin had guessed Barbaresco, thought that Barolo would be darker even with age. Do you think that it was the 17 that was really...
You know what? They have had a string of staggeringly good vintages from 13 on. It has to do with maceration. A lot of them are doing pump overs now instead of cap immersion. You know, there's not two defined camps like the traditionalists and the modernists. And, you know, you've got some Barbaresco producers, and Barbaresco is just a little bit further north, right, that are making heroic wines. I really think it's the hand of the producer. But if you can get yourself Langhe, Nebbiolo, yay.
Yay.
This is a very, remember I said it also comes from the area within Barolo that routinely produces more elegant wines with softer tannins. So it could be that as well. It could be, frankly, the terroir.
All right. I'm just gonna say up front, we're gonna run just a couple of minutes late, guys, because I want to be respectful of our final wine. You know, it's important to do it. Last word on what Madeline was saying. Presuming you haven't tried this last wine yet, if your tongue is still a little bit fuzzy and you've still got tannin on it too, that's Nebbiolo. You know, the tannins, even the bigger tannins in Sangiovese will dissipate. The ones in Nebbiolo linger, and when they're really big, they are astringent and they dry you too. It's just a meaner grape variety, as they say. All right, let's look at this wine. And it is probably somewhere between super dark and opaque. I can't really see the color through it. Sort of a nice dark ruby, and it's heading out to a ruby purple rim. It's got a lot of color, a lot of extraction, which when I roll it around in my glass, I've got somewhere between light to medium staining. And as I swirl it, I definitely have moderate to thicker and slower tearing, which suggests to me to be a more generous, bigger, higher alcohol wine, warmer climate wine. In the nose, right off the bat, a lot of concentration, a lot of power here. I'm getting a combination of actually red, black, and blue fruit, but more black and blue fruits here. I'm getting plums. I'm getting currants, particularly black currants, sort of in that kind of cassis-ish vein, getting a little bit of black raspberry. There's definitely, and that's it, sort of really mostly in the berry and plumish vein there. No real cherries per se, the small stone fruit, and not really that much tart fruit as well too. It really is a darker fruited wine, which the color suggests and the climate probably suggests in terms of its ripening. It definitely has some other elements to it that are, again, I would put them, Evan, in the fruit vein. So a lot of tobacco leaf, a little bit of bay leaf in here, a bit of green peppercorn in the wine as well too, sort of like that steak Diane type sauce thing, bit of bay. And then there's wood here. And the wood comes off not as that sort of sweet, overt milk chocolate thing, but more of a darker chocolate thing, higher cacao content, cocoa powder even, and a little bit of coffee bean, which can join together, give you a bit of that mocha thing going on, touch of spice, element there. And then there's this sort of wonderful backdrop of florals, a little bit of violet, a little bit of rose petal there. And once again, sort of this pushing through of sort of a tobacco cassis thing that really, I think, speaks to the variety that it's made from. As far as the terroir goes, definitely a minerality to the wine, definitely a strong sense of place and a grit and a grip to that sense of space there. Probably more inorganic than organic, although you could say there's definitely like a turned dirt character to it here. It's definitely stony. It's definitely rocky in nature. And then in the palate, the wine has attack. It has an acid level that's probably around medium plus. It's got an alcohol level that's somewhere between medium plus and high. I would skosh, to quote Madeline, probably more on the high side. The tannins themselves are gripping, although the wine itself is relatively round. So the tannins are well managed, although they are ample and they are apparent in the wine. The finish is quite long. The finish is quite expansive and seemingly changing with each second that goes by. I find it to be a very complex, very high quality wine, pretty expressive of exactly what it is grape-wise. And as far as the poll goes, what are our choices that we've got? We could dance in a few different places. We could dance in the land of Cabernet Sauvignon and all of its varietal kissing cousins. We could go in the land of Syrah, again, either as a pure play or perhaps blended. And remember that Syrah can be a blended wine, both in the Rhone and in other parts of the world. It could be Touriga Nacional, our friends from up in the north in Oporto, which are really making some stunning styles of big red dry wines today that are absent of fortification and absent of sugar. And it could be other. And of course, as you do your threads there, Portugal is going to be primarily your Touriga blend there, although there are certainly places that grow those other grapes, most notably Cabernet and the Teju. France is going to play in the first two camps, and increasingly, don't say no, but in a couple of vintages, you're going to start to see a little bit of Touriga Nacional popping into some of the blends down in the Southwest area. California, hell, we do everything here. And Chile is going to probably play in the first two camps up at the top.
Yeah. Oh, Evan, sometimes I look at the varieties that are on these choices and I go, this hasn't come up. Is it possible that Evan didn't put a Syrah in this kit? You start second guessing yourself instead of really listening to the wine. And I think back
well
to
said, Li Meng.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Listen to the wine. And as Madeline said before, which I think is a point well that, we spend so much time trying to see, is it green peppercorn, pink peppercorn that's been marinated in this or whatever. Focus on structure. Structure will generally never lead you wrong in combination with those flavor accents. And then again, using your color to pull it all home. So what do we got?
Let's share the results. We're at 40% Cabernet, and then everybody else kind of split. So you've got it three ways, pretty much.
Yeah, and this is, and I can see how there are elements of all three of those there. And speaking of Syrah, while it certainly could be a Syrah, there's probably not enough of that sort of meaty, peppery, garrigi kind of thing that you would associate with Syrah. And it's not, on the flip side, very Shirazian at the same time. So it's sort of kind of in the middle, which for me, process of elimination would lose it out. The Touriga call is a very interesting call, because if you've had some really well vinified Tourigas,
Evan.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if it's not pure Touriga. If you've got Franca, if you've got Cao, if you've got Barocca, you've got some of the other blended grapes in there, which to Touriga are what Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot would be to Cabernet. Would do it. The only thing I would tell you there is that you might have an even darker color coming from Touriga. They tend to be really opaque by nature, and the nature of the floral character there would be a little bit more, how should I say, you have this sort of flavor they call Esteva, or a rock rose character that is very typical of Touriga Nacional, which tends to be a bit more exotic in nature and expressive along with the fruit in a more savory style. Yeah, rock roses. All right. So that said, let's find out where we're going. Jump in that. I'm sensitive to our time. I want to finish this up. I know, Li Meng, you got some fun things you want to talk about at the end here, and then we'll join Derek in the happy half hour. So we are leaving that gorgeous Barolo and those wonderful wines, and Madeline's extraordinarily beautiful narrative and short
Merci.
story about Barolo. And we are getting up and we are leaving Europe. We are leaving that sort of area of the world, and we are heading, staying in the Northern Hemisphere, but we're heading back, and we're coming back to California because I got to go home at the end of the day. So I'm going to get in my car and drive south. But we're not in Napa. We're not in Sonoma. We're actually up in Lake County and not too far from the Clear Lake area in an appellation called the Red Hills of Lake County. And this is an area that does not get for recognition, much less respect and veneration as it should. I consider this particular spot of California, the Red Hills of Lake County, to be one of the handful of greatest sites.
A
You could
mile
add,
up, right?
yeah, a mile up to over
Mile up.
24, actually 2,600 feet above sea level, just off Mount Canocti there in Lake County. So this is high altitude Cabernet Sauvignon. Think about it, Spring Mountain's only like 1,800 to 2,100 feet. This is significantly higher. This is one of the highest spots for growing Cabernet. You get not only further UV issues, thicker skins, deeper pigmentations, higher diurnal exchange. But the benefit that you get here, aside from amazing winemaking and all that, is also the fact that it's it's essentially a volcanic vineyard. It is literally basalt. It has got flecks of obsidian in it, literally shining off of the land here, hence the name Obsidian Ridge. And it is a really special, special spot. If you have not spent enough time in Lake County, and specifically the Red Hills, because you can't afford Stefan Deroncourt's wines or Andy Beckstoffer's wines, these wines are equally stunning at a modest price relatively. That wine is less than $40 a bottle.
I mean,
I mean,
I work for a retailer, and when people want Cabernet and they go, I can't afford the whatever, I just go, hello, you
yeah.
know?
And 19 and 17 are separated on the grid there by virtue of, hello, fires in the middle. The 18s were not even produced as a vintage. So the 17 was stunning. We actually worked with that a few years ago. And this 19, I think, is equally stunning. This is a property that is owned by three gentlemen, Michael Terrian, and then the related Peter and Arpo Molnar. It is located high up, as you can see there. And they started this project, if you will, in 73. This is part two of a project that actually started out with a Chardonnay vineyard in the Carneros called Poseidon, which you've actually seen us feature before. This is those three gents, the brothers in the middle and the right, and Michael on the far left. And their winemaker is a gentleman by the name of Alex Bellows, who's been with them for about 10 years, doing a stunning job, really, I think, having put them on the map. And not only do they make great fruit, not only do they vinify great fruit well, but they actually own their own cooperage in Hungary and make their own barrels. And so that they can say it's estate barreled as well as estate bottled, as well as estate produced.
But there's nothing weird about the oak expression. That's
God,
what's so
no,
neat.
no, and
It's subtle.
it's not obtrusive
Yeah.
at all. It sets the wine off. It frames it beautifully. When you're looking at a painting, you shouldn't notice the frame too much, except when you're paying attention to it. And that is certainly the case here. It shows Bordelais. It shows you the grit and grip of a volcanic vineyard. And if you want to learn about volcanic wines, please buy John Szabo's book, The Treatise to All Things Volcanic, and a great wine to run with here. Again, just a lovely way to finish.